Number 12, is this really what you're saying, that we compress all of our hunts into a 60-day period? All our archery hunts, all our muzzleloader hunts, and all our rifle hunts, both bucks, does, whatever it may be, into a 60-day period?
If you want them to grow.
Well, in your response to WAFWA, you talked about the impacts that hunting have on, on the mule deer in general, and it would seem to me that maybe that intensive hunting pressure is maybe counterproductive and inconsistent with what you put forth in that response. I think this is a bad policy. I can't support it.
All right. Well, there we go. All right, let's see. We had some cab input on this item, and we need to, let's go through that, and then we'll bring it back to the commission. I really should have done that first. Let's see, we had something from Lyon County here. Supporters got something here. That was handed in. Everybody can read that. What else do we have?
Don Moldy.
There's something on this?
Yeah.
Let's see, anybody cabs first? We have more cabs? Want to report on their stuff? Go ahead, Mr. Dixon.
I gave you a card on this. Did you get my card, Vice Chairman?
There's quite a few cards here. He's shuffling.
He's shuffling.
What I'm asking.
For the record, Paul Dixon, Chairman of the Clark County Wildlife Advisory Board. We had our meeting last night. Well, Commissioners Schrum and Howe were up here testifying, I believe, in the thing, so they weren't able to attend, but Commissioner McBeth was there. Had a pretty good public turnout. This was one of the things that we spent some time discussing through with the public and as a cab. And if I run out of my time limit from Chairman Lent when he gets it set there, and I lose my time here, I will say that overwhelmingly we felt that this policy read in places like a regulation. I realized that what we read last night, you've made changes to some things that I was going to talk about today, which I'm happy to see. I would say that the things that Commissioner McBeth brought up were even beyond what we discussed at our meeting last night. But many of the things that he covered, we also covered. And I would say that to a large degree, anything that we discussed down there and he said up here, we 100% concur with. I guess I would ask the question, because several places in here you make the statements, you sound scientific data. And if you go to number 3, what exactly is the scientific data that allows you to basically say you're going to close or limit seasons if you're not near historical limits on things? And to be honest with you, you mentioned scientific data in here. I support that, but I have never seen a study that said population numbers were tied to harvest numbers in the way that you're suggesting here, that you have to restrict things. And so I would ask you to seriously consider that. The other thing is that you put in new today, all doe harvests shall cease until sufficient scientific data to justify them as presented. We have heard numerous studies here of how doe harvests help. We've read it from the WAFA reports. We've seen it in scientific literature that I've read. It all suggests that removing barren does, or when we had the doe hunt in the North Rubies where we did things, did anybody take notice to the the buck-doe ratios now coming into this season and counting, the fawn recruitment rates in the Northern Rubies there after we did that harvest of does? That's scientific data that suggests that removal of does up there had a positive impact, but we haven't heard a word from this commission on that. To me, you use the word scientific data and scientific justification, and it's like throwing something against a wall and seeing what sticks, and nothing sticks with you guys for scientific data other than you have a belief that we have too many predators and we've been over-harvesting or things. I will also say that this commission has never had a problem with removing, and hunters that I've talked to, multiple cow elk out of a herd. Yet every year we have to call more and more elk because our populations keep on growing. It might be because the habitat we have now is grassland and not sage, And the two species that live off of sage environments, mule deer and sage grouse, are suffering, where those that don't live off sage, things like antelope, elk, and horses, are doing quite well. And the last thing I wanted to say here, just because I mentioned it at my cab, which is, you talk about intensive grazing. We have one species of animal that's doing intensive grazing out there right now. It's called wild horses.
We have no control over it. So
why are not wild horses improving our herds, is my question to you, sir. If they're so bad, why are not wild horses improving our herds with overgrazing?
let's see. We have next. We have a card, or
We have,
Candido. Do you want to speak on this one?
Candido Mendy, Velco Cab. We voted in opposition. The motion stated that this policy is in violation of the governor's executive order, and that in February the State Board of Wildlife Commissioners refused to listen to any outside input as to the science of mule deer populations. That's how the motion read. Personally, I will state this for myself, being that this is something we just saw. I personally feel there's enough changes in here that this should come back to the cabs. I mean, when you start adding something like in accordance with state law on number 1, there's a lot of heartburn on number 1, and that may make a difference to somebody in our cab. But by not bringing it back, you've basically taken that away from us cab members. Thank you.
Thanks. I would always thought that would have been implied, but it's good to write it in there. Any more cabs have stuff from their cabs they want to present? Come on up, sir. You just
Jim
submitted
Janae,
this
Land
in
County Cab.
writing, right? Yeah.
We went through this pretty much last night the same way that Mr. Beth just went through it, and basically we feel that it's not written very good. You've got my sheet. I know I just handed them in, so you can read it, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows we are opposed to it the way it's written.
Thank you. Other cabs? All right, then we'll go on with public comment on it. Don, come on up. Oh, there's more than one Don. I gotta watch that, but yeah, you're up. Next Don could be next.
Mr. Chairman, Don Muldy, Reno. Thanks. I should say that I appreciate the time and energy people put into this subcommittee, because I actually attended a couple meetings myself. Thanks for the invitation to one of them, and put a few miles on my rig in doing so. I'm not going to say much today other than that Commissioner Macbeth stole my thunder, so I guess great minds think alike, or I'm too slow today, one or the other. Anyway, what I wanted to do is to put to bed this idea that 200,000 deer makes sense in this state historically, and actually have some numbers. I got the information from 3 sources. One is this table that you compiled, big game population estimates, 76 to current. Tony Wasley in the department's great monograph that actually extends the graph back to 1870, 140 years worth of deer data. And this book here, which is a terrific book, published in 1981, which contains mule deer estimate numbers for the nation and for the West from 1950 to 1976. And so putting all that together, I have put together for the odds makers a little, oops, let me have one of those back. What it amounts to is that if you take the 140-year time span that is available to be looked at in these documents I showed you, I think I got shortchanged on that. If you take the 140 years that we're talking about, those years where mule deer numbers were 200,000 or greater appear to be 10 years out of 140 years. Those years being 1959 to 1964, 1987 to 1990. 10 years out of 140, or in other words, 7% of the last 140 years have had mule deer numbers greater than 200,000. If you drop the bar to 150,000 or greater, those years are 1956 through 1972 and 1985 through 1992, for a total of 25 years out of the 140 years, or 18%. So what that means then is that mule deer numbers in this state have been below that is below 150,000 in number for 115 out of the 140 years that we can account for in this information. Or for those of us who like percentages, that's 82% of the time, which is more than half. So I simply present this to you for your, whatever you want to do with it, as backup for what you were mentioning. I also updated my little predator deer cost sheet. For anybody that's interested, there's some copies on the back of the room, and also some copies of this deer number thing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I'm going to comment on.
Thank you very much. All right, come on up. The other Don.
Donald, for the record, when the deer numbers were the highest, there was something that a constant in there. The ranchers were in charge of all predator control when the numbers were the highest, and the ranchers were allowed to use some real nasty stuff in those days, and that was basically the difference. And then on item 2, it says BLM Forest Service NDOW. The landowners should be listed in there, and along with the patented landowners, the allotment owners should be listed also, because the allotments they're not leases. When I die, my boys will pay inheritance tax on my range allotment. The tax is on the possessory interest. So it's very far from a lease. The money we pay in is for management. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Who we got next?
Tina Nappy.
Hello, Tina, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I was very happy earlier this afternoon that I was not sitting there with you when the no bear hunt people were here. That was a difficult decision. I sent you a letter very belatedly today and got a response back that said it had not been distributed. So I have brought it here today to share with you in expressing my concern about this P28 deer policy. I'm a conservationist, and maybe I shouldn't care as much about deer. Maybe I should care more about predators or non-game species. But I agree with your direction over the years that deer in many ways are our most important species that we need to manage for. They have the largest number of big game tags for what I consider the blue-collar hunter. They are statewide. They provide a significant source of income to this organization. They are highly visual. They are aesthetically pleasing. And as you know all too well, they feed our mountain lions. So I think it's really appropriate to have a policy and to work hard on the mule deer program. But it seems to me that this deer are too pervasive, too important to be limited to the committee that you have established. You basically have 3 counties represented, and as I read the committee structure, you have a rancher, somebody who works for Wildlife Services, and a guide on the committee. You don't have conservationists, you don't have a large array of sportsmen, you certainly don't have land trusts of people on it, and you don't have any federal agencies on it. I would highly suggest that the model that be used for what I hope you will do redoing this policy is the one that was used by the Greater Sage Grouse Plan, where everybody was invited in, and in particular the agencies like BLM. If you really want them to implement ideas, they need to be part of the discussion and the solution. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to be involved. Is that for me? And finally, I would like to say, and I'll pass this letter out, I have copies, that I'm really very distressed by the response that was made on the WAFA letter. We have The two publications that I have are one from WAFA and the Mule Deer Foundation, and I'd like to note that Department of Wildlife is a member of that working group, and that Mike Cox was a member of the committee that put together the publication I have on changing perspectives, and that the wonderful Mule Deer publication that the Department of Wildlife has put out by Tony Wasley, I'm sure benefited from the work of all the agencies helping together. The sportsmen have shouldered a huge part of the program, but the public lands are the public lands, and while sportsmen may make many of the decisions here, I'd like to point out that many of us are involved in the public land decisions, and I couldn't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. I did get a chance to read that email. All right, who'd we have?
Gil, Yannick, whatever it is.
Gil Watt.
For the record, Gil Yannick, for the, speaking as a private citizen, Policy 28 constantly refers to solid scientific data. Nowhere does it define what that is. And we've heard comments regarding the back and forth that the department has done with WAFA regarding the policy. And for some reason, we kind of always have looked up to the Mule Deer group from WAFA and their recommendations, and yet we're constantly, at this point, at odds with them, not agreeing with their comments when they talk to us about our policy, ignoring solid scientific data. In section number 9, we talk about maintenance of all water sources, and I'm wondering why we've left off the issues of the lecks on some of the individuals' properties, particularly private landowners. We know that sage grouse is a sensitive subject with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I know that the department, if we look at the heritage projects that have been proposed, there's a great number of them that improve habitat for sage grouse, because we do not want to see a listing, because we know what that listing would do to our ranchers, our farmers, and the economic situation in our state. But yet, we only pick on water sources. And finally, in item number 12, we're constantly being reminded by various cabs when we talk about quotas, number of tags being issued, and how important the number of hunting opportunities and what hunters bring to the various communities in our state, and limiting a season to 60. Can you imagine what the economic impact of that would be on a lot of these communities, guides, and people whose annual income really is made during the hunting season? So I think we've got to take that into consideration, because we're always talking about economic impact on what happens in the state, and this is one that's really going to be felt by an awful lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mel Belding.
Welcome, Mel.
How you guys doing today?
All right.
Mel Belding, Washoe County. I hope Ms. Nappy doesn't throw a shoe at me, because I kind of agree with most of her testimony. Scott, you said something very interesting at the end of someone's presentation. Might have been Mr. Dixon or something about horses and grazing on public lands, and you said we have no control over that. I disagree with you, sir. We do have control over that. We might not be listened to, but we do have control. And that is the same thing that this department gets when they try to have a voice in it also. I think everyone knows for the record that I am 100% pro-grazing on a sensible matter, but I disagree wholeheartedly with the statement that was made that the best numbers of mule deer were when we were having control by ranchers on public lands pertaining to predators. In the 50s, I agree with that statement, but it certainly is false, 100%. When we look at the herds increase in 1988 and 89, and hell, if I remember right, 1080, Mojo, Strychnine, all those things were outlawed in about 1973. So I don't mind someone saying something that's true, but if it's wrong, I'm going to bring it up. And I don't think that's a true statement. I think it should be brought up. Again, no control over it. I think number one, I think you guys are doing a great thing. Let's get some mule deer back. I don't think this is the way to do it, though. Number one should be struck entirely. The people who are trying to bring the mule deer back are trying to bring them back, but there are so many things that are out of their control. Just like you said, Commissioner Raine, that it is out of their control. They have no control over it. We're going to talk about burning PJ. Have you guys even thought about the Native Americans? Even one bit? Have you tried to get a permit to go burn pinyon juniper? Or just pinyon? I mean, we got that fight also. Number three, the numbers we're going to get, I mean, is somebody going to lowball them? You know, let's give a lowball number. Say, okay, I think in this area, a biologist could say that we should have 12 deer. Who's the judge? Who are you guys going to have judge of this? Buck and doe ratios. I've never heard one as low as 3, but I will tell you, when we talked about this 3 years ago, I called a lot of people, and 10 was a pretty common number. 10 bucks per 100 does. We shoot in Washoe County, we'd like to see 4,200 does per 100 bucks in 014 and 033. But you know what? I know they can do it out there at 15. Can I have just another minute? I believe
briefly
that of all these points, they're all great points. Number 5, it's a yearly change. I mean, anybody that you know, and I just sit on a stewardship board and listen to the cowboys, but hey, every year you've got a different change in the ground. What minerals are you going to give them? I think you really need to take this back, get a really good working group that understands, and bring us something a little different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Schremler.
Mike Stremler, do you have this written down? That'd be the last card we see here.
I'm gonna hand this to you. Open to this is why you need a policy. It's right here. This, I just have that as a bookmark for the consistency. What I handed to Mr. Macbeth is the Code of Federal Regulations for the BLM, and that's why you do need a policy. I'm not saying this is the policy you need. I'm just saying that you do need a policy in order to coordinate with the federal agencies. That's the federal law. So the rules are there. We just need to learn the rules and play by them. And you guys can pass that around. It's highlighted, and I showed it to your attorney, Mr. Stockton, earlier. So I got some brief points. First, the policy is a good starting point. I don't know if this is the right one, but it's a good starting point because you do need one. Maybe get more people involved, whatever. It's CFR for you guys back here. It's CFR 1610.3-2. That's why you need a policy. So you can look that up and it'll be important. 1610.3-2.
Title. You have to have the title.
Title 43. Title 43. Code of Federal Regulations. And it's titled Consistency Requirement. On the doe harvest, I don't know much about the buck to doe ratio. Out on the range, I'm a rancher. Out on the range, we need 1 bull to 10 cows. That's what we need out on the desert. I guess it depends where you're running them. Where you're running your mule deer, if they're running on the desert or if they're on a alfalfa field. And the other thing is like on doe harvest, I don't know all the data. I just know that if I kill half my cows, I'm going to have half as many calves the next year. That much I can do, figure out. The rotational grazing, high intensity, short duration, that's been proven that it can be done because I do it. And I've done some fire breaks with the BLM. That Code of Federal Regulations has all the rules in there. I don't disagree with any of them. I think they're all good. You just got to know it, and you got to teach the BLM sometimes what they are. And so we've done fire breaks. Fire probably wipes out more habitat for everything than any of us can try to do with heritage money or anything. So it's possible. Ray Hendricks, NDOW's in cooperation with Ray Hendricks. He just got a big award up there on the, what's the name of that ranch?
Smith Creek.
Smith Creek, that's correct. Smith Creek Ranch, and it's a cooperative deal where they're doing the holistic management for sage grouse. They're doing pinyon juniper removal. It depends on the rancher, it depends on the state agency, it depends on the federal government. But when you get all three of them working together and you've got a plan, a natural resource plan, you can get some of these things done. And then I know, like, predators is a big issue. I think predators make a big impact. I think there was an area just recently that they killed 18 lions where there wasn't a predator problem before, so, but there was.
Thank you very much.
You can pass that Code of Federal
Just
Regulations.
briefly follow up on a question somebody else had here earlier, was about tell us a little bit about how the high intensity grazing works. If you give us the 30-second spiel about the methodology.
Quoting Greg Tanner, you need to put cowboys back on horses out here, and the cowboys got to be on horseback. And you can herd them, you can use water, you can use mineral supplementation, you can control cheatgrass. UNR has just done a 5-year study where they've high intensity, keep the cows in a certain area. You could water down molasses and spray cheatgrass with it, and it would draw the cattle in. That would be high intensity. Mineral supplementation. In Washington, I'd take a piss in a campground and the does would come and lick it up. So there is minerals that do affect stuff, but high intensity grazing is a fact. I studied in New Zealand. They're light years ahead of us. They have a ungulate problem because they don't have predators there, but anyways, they're light years ahead of us in high intensity grazing. That's where I studied.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Was that in on public comment? Let's see. We had some comments. If we could get back to. Go ahead. Go down our list.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Ken Mayer for the record, acting director of the Department of Wildlife. Actually, just for your edification, Alan Savory in the 70s is the one, was a Rhodesian, back when Rhodesia was Rhodesia and not Zimbabwe, developed the Alan Savory method, and that's the short duration, high intensity grazing, and it's been utilized a lot, and it does have some real benefits. But it's high intensive. Get on the horse. You have to actively manage your livestock. Just don't turn them out, and it can produce some really good results. There's a number of issues that we have. Quite frankly, it is better than it was the first draft that we saw. We're just seeing this for the first time, like everyone else. I guess I would make a couple points here. Mr. Macbeth did a great job, I think, going through point by point. I would point to number one, this is not a department policy, this is a commission policy. I think this needs to be cleaned up in a number of places. And I'm glad that you recognize that we live within a government structure that, even while I have responsibility for the staff and the budget, I still have other people and other processes to answer to. And number three, I'll just point out here that the last statement, mule deer harvest should be reduced or eliminated in areas or units where populations are below objective population goals. I'll give you one example, then you'd shut down the deer season in Area 6. And Area 6 is not, it used to be 30,000 deer, now it's 7,000 deer, and the reason of that is because the winter range burned up. Yeah, is there some predator issues on the winter range? Yes, but not on the summer range, and we're producing lots of fawns. The other thing is that, I'll say this one more time, I've said it many times, there's not a deer biologist, ungulate biologist in the world that will tell you that harvesting bucks only affects total population. It does not. It does not. It's a fallacy to think that it does. You're not going to increase the deer population by eliminating the buck harvest. You'll change the buck ratio for sure. And that's what we've been doing, and we got buck ratios that are 30 plus, approaching 40. Not one bull for one buck per 10 does, you're looking at 4 or 5, but some bucks per 10 does. So to make this statement it's absolutely illogical, makes no sense whatsoever from a biological perspective. I also point to number 8. It's the policy of NDOW again. I think that needs to be changed. And the other things on 10, 11, where it says the department shall focus on coordinating.
Slow down just a little bit there, Ken.
Number
8.
Number 8, it says it is the policy of NDOW. I would argue it's the policy of the commission, not the department. And number 10, the first sentence says the department shall focus on coordinating planning. We do a lot of that. This is a kind of axiomatic, but I think this shall is too directive from my perspective. 11, the department shall practice intensive predator control that are in low in relation to historical highs. There may be a number of reasons why we want to do predator control that has nothing to do with whether they're at high or somewhere else on the scale of the population. So that's quite limiting. I don't think that from a biological perspective makes any sense. The last thing says the department and commission shall consider reductions in government-paid predator control in units when deer population has 5 years continual growth and or decreasing predator population. I mean, yeah, that might be something that we would adopt, but I wouldn't limit ourselves to that. And it may not be something that we necessarily would have to be. We should adopt. I mean, that's awful specific. Number 12, I will reiterate what Mr. Macbeth had to say. This is arbitrary and capricious completely. I mean, to say that you're going to not exceed 60 days based on what? Your personal preference, your personal idea. There's no biological reason that you need to do this, number one. Number two, you heard what J.J. Gogachia said to you about cow harvest. Okay? We are not going to meet our livestock friends. We have made a commitment to the livestock industry to meet certain population objectives. We don't kill some cows, we're not going to do that. And in this particular case, if you start limiting seasons arbitrarily to 60 days, the first thing you do is you limit the junior opportunity by 25%, and in some units, the general hunting to 50% of what's currently going on. So I think it's a slap in the face to sportsmen, and it's something that, as sportsman representatives, you need to step back and take a look and ask yourself, is that what you truly want to do? And the last thing here is the department shall support and encourage efforts of appropriate control, practice of noxious weeds, invasive species. We don't have a problem with that. We're going to do that. We think that Medusa head is the next huge scourge. At least the livestock and wildlife do eat cheatgrass. Medusa head they don't. But to say that the Department of Wildlife shall support, I think that again that needs to be tempered a little bit. Anyway, that's our comments. I don't know if Dag New wants to say anything as well, but.
Thanks, Ken. No, I think you did a good job, and we're aware that this is a commission policy and there are goals, but again, the NRS states that the commission's goal is to guide the department, and we just feel like some of the wording of some of the shall should be changed to actually make the policy internally consistent, because there are some shalls and some shoulds in there.
All right. Let me throw out a few things here. Let's bring it back to commission. One of them is 13, so I just was most recent one brought up. Shall support and encourage efforts of appropriate control practices. Appropriate is the mitigating word in there. Who would determine that? I would assume that'd be the department. Item 12, that wouldn't have anything to do with elk. I mean, we're talking about deer for one. And this is for populations that are desired to grow. Desired to grow how much? If you got one that's really limited, and there is a lot, and it was amazing how much scientific evidence there is, in fact, on this. We went over this stuff. There is evidence. To say that there is none is to ignore the other huge body of evidence. There's so much stuff on this.
And Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to bring that data and put it in front of all of us.
Thank you.
It doesn't exist.
We've had it at the committee meeting. It was actually, there's in support, but anyways, okay. We had it in many meetings. Let's see. Where are we here? A couple other items. Number one, I think the most important item here is that we need to set and reach big game production goals. We gotta have goals. If we don't have goals, and that's kind of what the committee came up with. First thing is, we gotta have goals, whatever those goals may be. This doesn't necessarily say what our goals will be. So we gotta have them and reach them. That's not what appears to be happening now. We need to get goals. However they're determined, whatever they are. You know, the absence of the previous wording of in accordance with state law, it's like, well, okay, if we have to add that in there, that's fine, but last I checked, everything we do has to be in accordance with state law, federal law, Constitution of the United States of America, and the republic for which we stand. I mean, so it was, to me, understood, but great, we'll stick that in there. If we want to stick in some more words like in the Constitution, and, you know, that's, yeah, it has to be in accordance with that too. There's a lot of words in here that this is really a fairly broadly worded policy. Like some of the criticism of it is, well, it says far below, what is historical numbers in 3? Well, that's the thing. There's no way in a policy you can say exactly what that is. This is a broad policy. Far below, that's to be determined by the people in a specific situation and specific circumstances. Most everywhere where there is a shall, it's generally followed by, well, and you should do this, and you should do that. The shalls are basically followed by a whole lot of shoulds. And with the example of some of them are shall, support, and encourage. Come on, that's the support and encourage are the mitigating words of appropriate control. So that's basically it. I think a couple additions there. The at times and excess, that was undoubtedly an omission there on purpose. I've rambled on. We've talked about this in a couple of previous meetings, not this specific thing, but this is a basis that the other documents we've seen before are a basis for this. Oh, and the wording, one other thing, the wording on the grazing, that was directly from Nevada Department of Wildlife. That was wording, that was determined. The way the committee got those words and why we kept using those words is that was what all the biologists were telling us. That's what the Nevada Department of Wildlife biologists were telling us. That's what the studies are telling us. That's why we use those words. Most of these words came from the Nevada Department of Wildlife and from the various sort of things. A lot of them came straight out of WAFO documentation. All right. Go ahead, Commissioner Howell.
Mr. Stockton, you reviewed this, right? And
yes,
probably made some changes when you reviewed it.
I did.
And did you have some problem with the word shall instead of should?
It's like Chairman Raine was talking about it, and we talked about it, and again, if the language is mandatory, then what you're trying to do is enact a regulation. So, you know, the language, I think, in deference to Director Mayer, the language is guidance as it stands now, I think. I don't think it requires the department to do anything because policies are not law. We've talked about this a lot of times. If something is mandatory, then it's a regulation and you have to go through the Administrative Procedures Act steps, you know, that Ms. Schwamberger talked about today. This is a policy, so this is guidance. It's not law, but it's guidance to the department. And so in the shalls, as long as the shall doesn't say you shall do X, and hopefully it says you shall look at these factors or whatever, that's okay. I'm okay with that. I mean, I understand the concerns, but, so in other words, I tried to make this into a policy and not into an illegal regulation. Is that clear, or I'm just...
Clear to me.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got several comments here.
Where it says in here, population in excess of 200,000, I don't think Nevada's ever had 200,000 deer. I'd like to see proof. We've counted 200,000 deer. I don't think the state could hold 200,000 deer in our lifetime. And I'd like to see absolute proof of that. But another thing, there's some comments. They've never seen population numbers never tied to harvest numbers. Well, I have them. I've been doing a lot of research on this, and those are available if you want to work. And I've done them, and I've got the graphs on those. On number 3, I agree. Last sentence, mule deer harvest should be reduced or eliminated where populations are below objective population goals. That's the problem. We do not have population goals in these units. And that is a problem. We do not have them. I'll give you an example. We've got a project going in 015 in Washoe County, and I don't see anyone from Washoe County here. When do you stop it? When you reach your population goal. There are no population goals, so it goes on and on forever. There is no population goals in 014 where we're doing the predator. Did I say 15? It's 014. There are no population goals, and so that is the problem. And if you go down to number 11, that's exactly what we need to do. That's what Utah does when they're predator problem. The department goes into Utah and they say, here's our population goals, and they go in, Wildlife Services, and they take the predators down, and once they reach the population goals, they stop. Because you don't want to kill predators, every last predator on the face of the earth. You just want to take them down till you reach your population goals like Utah does, and then they move to another area. And we've been in 015 for, 6 years. And no one can say, when do they leave? We can use them in another area like 015. No one has any population goals. And I'm embarrassed by a cab member to hear on number 12, Gil Yannick say,
No personal.
I'm sorry, by a cab member, we must look at the business economics first before we look at the resource of deer. If it takes 60 days, we've got to give the deer a rest sometimes. And maybe we should shut the season down for a year. But you cannot keep harvesting, expanding these seasons and have muzzleloader, longbow. Everyone wants to have a season, a pistol, and expand the season to 90 days. You're harming the resource. And we have got to look at the resource, and I could care less about the business economics. I'm here to care about the deer and the resource. And hear somebody from a county board say we've got to look at business, we're going to delete the business, and that is really totally wrong, and I'm embarrassed to hear that. And this is exactly right. We have to set some type of time and goals in 12 because we're harming the resource by hunting them from June to December. We're really harming them. We've got to give these animals out there a little rest. That's my opinion on this.
Increases in energetic stress, I believe, is move off of. What's that? Go ahead, Commissioner Vogler.
Can I borrow this?
You
sir?
may.
Probably don't need it. You guys got me fired up now, so you're stuck with the standard Hank. No, the standard Hank Vogler lecture. Science. Do you think that I got out of college in 1971 and put these blinders on and I've hated wildlife ever since? I spent my whole life either hunting or watching or being around wildlife. No, I don't have a cadre of people to go out and count every one. But we keep plowing this same furrow. And I think everything we can do we can make it better. But we're not. We're not using all the tools in our toolbox. And we're not using them appropriately to me. Now, we talk about habitat. Okay. So we had some big fires in Elko County. 1965, it burned off from Elko to Wells. Came back, they grazed it off again. Sagebrush doesn't fly, it just keeps spreading back out. It takes a while. But if you don't take off that light fuel, after a while it gets dense again, and then instead of having a 25-year fire pattern, you wind up with a 10-year or a 5-year or every other year pattern. I graze sheep intensively, and with a herder, and with a GPS, because I was out in the checkerboard and the BLM wouldn't go along with the study. I stayed on the checkerboard. We eliminated almost all of the cheatgrass on the private land. Did we see deer? I had a herder thought he had an elk. I'd never seen a bigger mule deer in my life. Right out there in those burns. I saw does, I saw fawns, and guess what? All the sagebrush wasn't burned. There was acres and acres of sagebrush. Okay, yeah, it gets pretty snowy out there, and it blows off a lot of faces now because it's burned. So that was the big dog that ate everybody's homework in Elko County. White Pine County's forests are made out of asbestos. That you can't get a fire down there to save your soul. We get lightning strikes and nothing happens. So there's no deer there either. So how do you say it was this habitat? There's no fires down. There's no fires to any indication. When the sage chicken, when the deer were at their zenith, according to Mr. Moldy's calculations here and charts, we also had sheep, 1 million head of them. We had twice as many cows. They're gone. We have huge fires. We put out the fires. The pinyon and junipers come back. The metamorphosis is out there. I remember when the sage chickens used to get up by the thousands. And then they would get so thick they'd die off. But they came right back. Because they're, and we can't do this, I know. I'm just telling you anecdotally because I'm not a scientist. We could kill an eagle just as easily as we could kill a mouse. We could kill a hawk. All those predator type animals were at their lowest ebb until 1973. And from then on we only had one other spike. We had 3 or 4 years of very wet years. That's part of the package. Yes, sir. You have any animal on it, even a coyote. The more coyotes you kill, the larger the litter sizes you start seeing in the remaining coyotes. It's just nature. If the sheep go in or the deer go in the winter poor, they're not going to have as many twins, but they still have offspring. Are we going to have hunting seasons to where a trophy is a 3-point? Or are we used to have 4 points that people went after? We had forked horns that you took your kids out because they were closer and dumber and stood around. You could get a shot at them. And the old guys would go, okay, you kids go over here, kind of push on that draw, and I'll go get on this point over here, and I'll meet you there with a pickup. Yeah, and you went out and got on the point, the big buck run by, you shot him, turned all the little bucks back, the kids got those. I mean, that was out there. That was out there. I saw it, lived it every day. And then guess what? We'd have a bad winter, and they'd die off, and we'd come back. Another tool we've thrown away is we get these rigid programs. We're going to do a study in the rubies. Okay. Well, what happens if we have one of those years that we don't have a lot of snow in the rubies, but we get 30 inches of snow at Baker, Nevada? And when we pile up all the deer down in there where there were no fires, and they're on good feed and they're going to make it, and all the coyotes from Elko County go down there, 30 inches of snow, and whack on them terribly down there. I think they killed 400 coyotes on a bunch of wintering deer in the end of the diamonds this year just because they had concentrated. Is that random killing of coyotes? Probably not. But if they all pile up on the deer, what's going to have more effect on them, the stress of predation or the stress of winter? They have the stress of winter every year, but if they're all piled up and they chase them out in the snow and kill them. Where's Mr. Haskins? 1992, I went into his office. I was so upset. I said, Richard, we got a bunch of antelope trapped in a canyon. They got plenty of feed. The coyotes are slaughtering them. They're just running them out in the brush and killing them. They're at random. It's not they're just killing them all. Nothing was done. I went out there with some guys together with snowmobiles. We killed 57 coyotes one day with snowmobiles. Well, those are the things we can do. Those are the things that the hunters and the cab people, you get a big snow, let's have a coyote calling contest. Let's use every effort to bring our mule deer back to a level that we can all be happy with it. Let's not have a deer season where we just go out and shoot all the forked horns that were born 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. Let's have some of those monsters, and then some mediocre ones, and then this ones and that, and et cetera, et cetera. But you can't be going around killing your breeding stock, your cows, your calves, or not calves, but your ewes or your does, and expect them to come back. And I should be the last person on earth that's giving this lecture, because we started lambing the 25th day of April, and the coyotes eat us alive. There are no rabbits in our country. The ground squirrels haven't come out because it's been so cold. There's nothing for them to eat. The deer are gone. Everything's gone. 25th, we start harvesting them. We went to one drop, and the coyotes had killed every lamb in that drop. On the 3rd day of May, the antelope started hatching. We have not lost a lamb since in either bunch. But all the does are starting to pull back together because they don't have any fawns. And they all have twins. I don't care what anybody says. The twinning rate in those antelope in our area down there, whatever the feed base is, or the mineral base is, they have a gazillion twins. And the old doe sees the coyote coming, and she starts walking that way, and 2 more coyotes come in and kill both fawns. Does or kids or whatever you call them. They slaughter them. Should I be complaining? Hell no. I should say, bring me some more antelope. They're the bait that keeps me in business because I can't use 1080. Then they go on to the deer. Now they go on to the elk. We got to do everything we can. My country, it is not habitat. You cannot show me one place that the habitat is not 100 times better than it used to be. All you have to do is go to the Turner Channel where they have the old cowboy movies. Go watch an old cowboy movie. Go look at the pictures of the little bighorn where my cousins was all camped on the hillside. As bare as that floor right there. That was grazing, intensive grazing, whether it was buffalo, their horses, or what. Go look at an old 1950s, 1960s, even all the way back in the 30s. When they made those cowboy movies, the ground's bare. They're nothing. If a blade of grass come out of the ground, something was there to eat it. That's not the case today. It hasn't been that way for probably 25 years. But our deer population is still going down. Do we have chronic wasting disease? Do we have these huge die-offs of bad winters? No, we have a problem. And yeah, it's habitat. It's the lions and the coyotes that are laying in that habitat, and once they got that deer herd down to this point, it can't grow. It just can't grow. It just keeps staying right there. Okay, I quit. Thank you.
All right, anybody else down this end? Commissioner Pearl. You're on.
Got to get something to talk into so Mr. Dixon can hear.
I do have bad ears.
So do I. First off, I believe it is necessary to have a mule deer plan, and that we need to adopt something that does provide policy to the department relative to issues that we believe are necessary for the growth and protection and the like for mule deer in Nevada. I will say this, that with respect to the issue, and I think, unfortunately, I think it colors some of the rest that's in the proposed policy here, and that is in the second sentence, or third sentence actually. Historically, mule deer existed in populations in excess of 200,000, but has suffered population declines. I think the last part of that is true. However, I sort of believe, as Dr. Lent does, that I'm not really sure whether we ever had populations up to as much as 240,000 that were shown in some instances in that. I do think that if we did, that was for a very short span, and I appreciate what Don Mulday, you probably keel over dead hearing me say that, Doctor, but I do think the chart that you've provided actually is a pretty good documentation of it.
The best numbers I can get.
I don't know anything with respect to prior to about 85, 86, but in my own review of the situation, the important years are the later years here, where we have a little better information. I think are a little bit better documented information, but I do appreciate what you have, and I think essentially the numbers that you show for, say, 85 on are pretty much right on with what the maximums were during that period of time. But what that shows is that we probably have had a population since about 93 that never exceeded about 120,000. And it has bumped along on that path and has actually gotten worse over the years. So that part tells us that there is a need to improve. I don't think 200,000 is a realistic goal. And quite frankly, I think that should be removed from this policy.
Suggestions for wording here. That's what I'm looking for. For that sentence, we've had one that says as at times, but just in exit.
I think, I don't think you could put a number to it because,
Okay, without a number, how would you like wording?
Fluctuations. Well, I think I think you could be ambiguous about it to say that population numbers were much higher than they are currently, and we have suffered population declines without sticking a specific number.
Historically, mule deer existed in higher
populations.
Higher.
Than today. But those populations have suffered declines. I think that's a pretty true statement. I don't think anybody disagree with that statement. I also believe that in some places, I think it's a kind of a typographical sort of thing, but wherever it does say NDOW on it, that should be, because this is a department policy, not NDOW.
We set policy for NDOW.
I understand,
so
but
it should say both.
Where you have mentioned specifically that NDOW, it is the policy of NDOW on Section 8 should be changed, as was suggested.
Well, this would create that.
That would create policy for the commissioners.
For the department, who we set policy for.
Well, but you have two separate things. You have a commission policy, and you have the NDOW executing regulations that we have adopted to implement those policies. So I think there is a difference. I think that there are some other places you should consider changing shall to should. Number one, the Department of Wildlife should actively pursue enhancing game populations. And that the Commission's policy, last sentence, is to focus efforts on active game production. Is for the department to focus on active game production. Because it is our policy, not the department's policy.
And I have to disagree. The NRS does not say that the commission has any authority to set the policy for the department. It says that.
I did not hear what you said.
I'm sorry. I'm specifically referring to 501181, and it's establishing broad policies for protection, propagation, restoration, transplanting, etc. But there's nothing in here that says that the commission has authority to set policy for the department. It's to guide the department with broad policies. That's completely different than setting a policy for the department.
To go on, I think that, and part of the reason I'm concerned in item 3 has to do with the language, again, that refers back, it occurs to me, it refers back to the original number of 200,000. And therefore, you cannot use a specific number as a historical high deer number. Because that number has floated as it has, last year is different than this year, is different than it was 10 years ago. I don't have any specific language I can tell you. Because again, the new changes.
What we struggled with a lot was trying to come up with something, and other than, vague wording of the far below.
I think that the issues of I think there's some of these are just relatively minor changes, I would believe. On Section 4, the Department of Wildlife should encourage, in my view, the language should say should encourage well-managed grazing of cattle and domestic